You're listening to Big World Network.
Steam and Sorcery, Book 2. A trans-dimensional adventure starring Phineas Frakture and Sir Vlishgnath, the Cleansing Light. Episode 1. Written by Joseph Gatch and Daniel Mitchell. Read by Catherine Ricks. And it was then that I first laid eyes on it, a wondrous new discovery, combining the vast potential of Darla Shield technology and the unlimited arcane power of the Western Kingdoms. Such beauty to behold. But then, as quickly as my salvation appeared, so too did it disappear, locked away in the university vaults to collect dust and remain forgotten, all to appease a closed-minded sect of zealots that still practice 1100-year-old teachings passed down by a shepherd. I simply will not stand for it. I will recreate the man known as Phineas Frakture's technological marvel from scratch if I must, far from the prying eyes of the church. So be it, if I must live as an outcast. It would be far more preferable, knowing that my reward awaits me in a world I've never visited, yet subconsciously yearn to return home to, than remaining here in this intellectual quagmire, where cunning and creativity are trampled by tradition and superstition. Let them hunt me. I no longer care. I have choked on the outrageous restrictions of the All-Fathers Church for far too long. It will all be worth just a few more months of suffering when I first lay my eyes upon what I know to be my true home, in a world where genius is not only welcomed, but acknowledged and respected for what it is, unbound by ridiculous notions such as morality. Even now I write this with trembling hands, emboldened by the prospect of the freedom to create as I see fit. My mind is made up, and I shall set out this very night, to finally rid myself of this fetid existence. It is as if my purpose in life has been made clear for the first time. From the Journal of Devarius. Gathered outside the crude wooden door that looked to have been hastily slapped in place near the cavern's entrance, 30 black-caped church knights, led by Sir Vlishgnath, formed a half-circle around him, each of them standing statuesque with their capes flapping wildly in the strong wind coming down off the mountain peaks. Garbed in his suit of full plate, with the gold dragon shield buckled to his left forearm, Vlishgnath shouted to be heard above the sound of the howling winds and the noises emanating from the other side of the door. "Form up, we're going on. Remember, Devarius was a circle mage and a brilliant engineer in his own right, so call out any dangers you spot. He's had almost 4 months to fortify his position, but his heresy ends today. Let's make this quick and clean, and we all return home in one piece. Understood?" All at once, the church knights let out an enthusiastic monosyllabic cry of affirmation. Vlishgnath nodded in response as he reached for the handle of retribution. "Swords!" he called out, and as retribution rang out to make its presence known, the accompanying sound of 30 blades sliding from their scabbards joined in with it. Turning around, Vlishgnath stood in front of the door with his cape flailing at his side, planted his left heel in the ground, and delivered a powerful front kick that nearly shattered the rickety wooden door. As the church knights filed inside, they found themselves in a massive expanse of cavern that looked to continue on underground, the torches that hung in intermittent sconces having long been extinguished. Holding retribution out in front of him to light the way, Vlishgnath was still forced to shout, as the repetitive thrum of machinery had grown nearly deafening now that they were inside. "You, 6, stand guard at the door. No one comes in or goes out." Nodding in response, the ones Vlishgnath had selected took up a position at the door, and once they were settled, Vlishgnath continued on with the others. As their path took a gradual spiral leading them further underneath the mountain, a pulsating blue light danced off of the walls from around a sharp turn in their path, and as they drew near, Vlishgnath gave the silent motion for them to ready themselves. Once they were set, Vlishgnath raised his sword and ordered the charge. None of them were prepared for what awaited them inside. Massive constructs made of equal parts human flesh, clockwork mechanics, and crackling arcane energy. Twin power cores shielded by thick glass were clearly visible in the centers of the creatures' stomachs, the pale flesh of their forearms connected to their biceps by metal joints that gave them 180 degrees to bend their arm in either direction, with a ball-bearing system that allowed them to rotate the lower half of their arm in a full 360-degree spin. 6 of the abominations stood motionless atop metal platforms with glowing red eyes, spiraling coils poised above their head, infusing them with arcane energy and recharging the cores at their centers. Coming to a halt, Vlishgnath and the church knights beheld the constructs with a loathsome sort of disgust. Then they spotted the former circle mage, known as Devarius, near the back, tinkering with an enormous circular archway. Even from a distance, Vlishgnath immediately recognized the structure. A similar one had been used to send a strange traveler by the name of Phineas Frakture back to his home. "Circle Mage Devarius, under the authority of the Church, I am hereby placing you under arrest. Resistance will be met with necessary force, and aggression will result in summary execution. Keep your hands where I can see them, heretic." Upon hearing Vlishgnath's voice, the robed figure of Devarius stopped, his greasy black hair pulled back in a tail that hung down the middle of his back. He wore a thick pair of brass goggles, and with a grin as he glanced over his shoulder at the church knights, he reached over and pulled a nearby lever. Reacting instantly, the 6 automatons of flesh and steel lurched forward, their vice-like hands grasping at the church knights with a mindless urge to destroy. At once, the church knights fell upon them without fear, their swords going to work on the soft parts of the automatons that were susceptible to a blade. At first, Vlishgnath fought alongside them, until suddenly one of the church knights reached out and tapped his pauldron to get his attention. "Cleansing light! The circle mage is opening a portal!" And indeed, even as Vlishgnath looked over, a small blue dot in the center of the circular archway where Devarius stood grew and began to spread out. "Go! He must be stopped! We will hold back the monsters!" one of the others shouted, and with a dutiful nod, Vlishgnath took off in a full-blown sprint. Standing before the portal, Devarius turned, pulling his goggles up onto his forehead to reveal a pair of sunken brown eyes, a triumphant smirk on his face. "You're too late, church knight!" Devarius shouted, holding his hands out at his sides and taking swift steps back. "My creation lives, and soon I shall be carried away from this cesspool of ignorance and stagnation." Still rushing forward, as Vlishgnath approached the circle mage, a loose wire fell in his path, and without so much as a moment's hesitation, Vlishgnath clove through it without breaking stride. A loud backfire was heard as one of the fixtures on the side of the archway let out a burst of flame and smoke. Devarius spun around just as the portal's blue surface began to ripple. "No! You've disengaged the transdimensional stabilizers! The reaction is going to implode in on itself if we don't!" But it was at just that moment that the blue surface shot forward, another loud explosion going off that shook the very ground they stood on as the portal reached forth. It grabbed hold of Devarius and Vlishgnath, just as the church knight fell upon the circle mage and pulled them into the unknown before blinking out of existence. The end of the term was drawing near. Leaves had returned to the trees, the snow was long melted away, and thoughts of summer activities plagued the minds of students as they sat, trapped in the classroom of one Professor Phineas Frakture. As he droned on about the hazardous implications of a clogged steam valve and the resulting explosion rending the immediate area into chaos, the students were either falling asleep at their desks or staring blankly out the window at what was the most perfect day. The sky was clear and the most beautiful cerulean blue. Birds flew to and fro, making their nests for the summer, and those fortunate to not have class at that moment frolicked in the courtyard, enjoying the fresh, warm air. Inside, however, the clock stayed at 2:45 and moved infinitesimally as conscious eyes stared at it. And then boom! Phineas Frakture yelled, punctuating his statement by slamming the largest book in the room upon the top of his desk. 30 bodies jumped in their seats simultaneously, and while those awake recovered gracefully, those asleep mostly spilled onto the floor along with the heaps of papers and books that sat upon their desks. Now that I have everyone's attention, let's turn to page 164 and begin reading on the history of the flywheel. Nerman, please begin. As the 19-year-old began reading, his classmate next to him happened to look out the window once again. Out in the distance, over the skyline of Manhattan, a formation of clouds was beginning to coalesce. Darker than anything that should have been present in the sky that day, a mixture of putrid greens, reds, and black, swirled into a vortex that stretched its atmospheric finger toward the streets of New York. Professor Frakture, there's a cloud out there," stated Willoughby. "Congratulations, Simon. You finally made the distinction. Continue, please, Nerman," Phineas responded. Nerman continued, hesitantly, as his attention was divided between what was in the text and the spectacle outside the window. The sky had suddenly gone dark, and lightning surrounded the vortex. "Professor, I think you should really see this," Nerman said, interrupting the flow of the chapter. In that instant, a wave of energy spread out from the center of the vortex, dissipating the surrounding clouds and once again leaving clear skies. "What?" Phineas exclaimed, slamming his book shut and walking over to the window. "Yes, the cloud looks like a duck. That's completely worth ruining Mr. Mendelhorn's essay on the flywheel." The bell rang, signaling the end of the class period, and the room was filled with the cacophony of books and papers being shuffled into bags, and the thunder of feet heading for the door. As the last cleared out, Phineas looked at the disheveled room. "I need to assign homework at the beginning of class." Picking up a paper from the floor and arching an eyebrow at the gibberish written upon it, he sighed heavily. "At least I won't have to endure correcting their stupidity on Monday night." Outside, he could hear the jabbering of students as they milled around the courtyard and pointed up at the sky. Phineas opened a window and leaned out, looking up. "It's shaped like a duck. Have someone take a photograph of it. The thrill will last longer," he shouted as he slammed the window shut. "I should teach second grade instead of college. Their attention spans are much longer." Packing up his things for the weekend, Phineas headed out of the university and hailed a hansom for a ride home. On the way, as they traveled through the city, there was a ruckus off to the left down a side street. If he had bothered to look, Phineas would have seen a scuffle as a man, dressed in full armor, was being piled upon by 20 uniformed police officers. "Did you see the cloud, sir? Most amazing thing I've ever seen in the city in all my years," the cabbie said in conversation. Irritated by everyone's fascination with the cloud, Phineas just muttered, "That must have been some duck."
Music by Kevin MacLeod.
You're listening to Big World Network.